Hi, you're on the channel Logline, and this is a movie Everest. This is the story of the loudest tragedy of conquering the highest mountain on Earth. At the beginning of the film we are greeted by an informational note. It tells us that in 1953 two climbers conquered Everest for the first time. After that, the best of the best climbers tried to repeat their feat, with 1 in 4 of them dying during the ascent. In 1992, Rob Hall created a commercial organization and successfully guided his clients to the summit of Everest for 4 years. This success prompted other professional climbers to create similar organizations. And already in May 1996, 20 teams are trying to conquer the summit in the same 2-week period. This leads to disastrous consequences. Events are shown almost 2 months before the tragedy. Rob and his team are preparing for their flight. They are now discussing what is happening at base camp at the foot of Everest. About 20 teams are there. They say that Rob's team will include a journalist. He will not be charged money, but instead will write an article and take pictures with the entire team. It is mentioned that the journalist was to go in Scott Fisher's group, Hall's competitor. Before boarding, Rob is seen off by his pregnant wife. She asks him to return before the baby is born. At the Kathmandu airport, the introduction to the team continues. We are shown back Doug, who works as a mailman, and a journalist who has promised to write an article. The story goes that Doug has already been to the south summit of Everest and conquered other mountains. This arouses Beck's underlying envy and respect. The whole group gathers at the hotel. Rob greets them and tells them that the climb will not be easy and precautions should not be neglected. At best you can get frostbite on your hands and feet, and at worst you can lose them. Rob says that at an altitude of 8,000 meters the human body is unable to function normally. Under such conditions, the body will kill itself. So Rob's job is to get the crew down safely. They will have 40 days to prepare for the ascent. By helicopter the group reaches the city at 2,860 meters. Now they have to walk. Beck is already getting sick. His acclimatization is not going as fast as he expected. After a few hours, the group reaches base camp at 5,364 meters. They are introduced to Helen, the camp hostess. Rob Hall approaches Scott, the same athlete the reporter was supposed to approach. Scott was busy setting up the safety ropes. Dr. Caroline tells the group about the specifics of the climb. They need to get used to the thin air. To do this, they will make several climbs, where each one will be higher than the previous one. Their ascent will start from dangerous places where many climbers have died. The doctor speaks of hyperthermia, pulmonary, and cerebral edema. In this case it is necessary to get the victim down as quickly as possible, otherwise there is a risk of death. During one of the acclimatization climbs, a problem arises. Because of the large number of climbers in hard-to-reach places, a queue forms. From this the tourists start to freeze. Beck, freezing his hands off, nearly falls off a ladder while hiking over an abyss. Rob pulls him out. Beck tells him to his face that this is not what he paid the money for. Because of this incident, Rob reaches out to other climbing organizers and tries to arrange to climb to the top at different times. No one likes the idea. To reduce the risk, he teams up with Scott Fisher. A few days before the climb, Rob receives a message from his wife that she has learned the sex of her unborn child. Such news unwittingly causes the climbers to share their stories. John asks everyone what they are climbing Everest for. Yasuko Namba wants to close the 7 Summits program. Doug dreams of being an example to the younger generation. On May 9, 1996, Rob and Scott's group begins the ascent. During the ascent, one of the climbers falls ill. Scott decides to go down with him to base camp to monitor the situation. A little later, an avalanche causes the climber to go down. Rob catches him. Once at intermediate camp, Rob contacts Fisher. It turns out he's already started climbing. Such overload is too dangerous even for a professional climber. To recover, he injects himself with medication. Rob recommends that he rest. Scott starts climbing anyway. Helen reports on the weather conditions. She says a storm is coming from the Indian Ocean that will reach Everest on May 11th. Beck, sharing a tent with Bug, tells him that he feels depressed at home but he feels good in the mountains. The rest is coming to an end. The climbers continue on to the next intermediate camp at 7,951 meters. Here they stay for the night. Because of the lack of oxygen, they have to sleep in oxygen masks. At this time Scott Fisher joins them. He and Anatoly Bukreev start talking. Anatoly offers to go down because of the strong wind. But Fisher wants to do like Rob Hall, wait until morning and see the weather conditions. On the 10th of May at night, Rob Hall comes out of his tent and sees that there is no storm. The team begins to pack up to be on top of Everest by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At this time, Fisher decides to get some sleep due to weakness. He lets his group go up, promising to catch up with them. At 8,400 meters, Beck loses his sight. Rob Hall then leaves him waiting for the climbers to help him. The group climbs to the steps of Hillary. It turns out that the people in charge have not installed insurance. Because of this, the climbers have to fix the situation on their own. During the ascent, Doug loses his strength. He starts coughing and can't keep up with the other climbers. He falls behind. After waiting a long time to set up insurance, several hikers begin to make their way down the slope. They approach Beck and offer to go with them. He refuses, saying that they will come for him soon. After a while, the climbers finish installing the safety harnesses. The first climbers reach the top. The first climber is Anatoly Bukrev. After him comes John. The rest of the group, except Doug, reaches the right height. Rounding out the ascent is Rob Hall. He reports back to base camp. He warns that the group is starting to descend and he will wait for Doug. Later, Scott Fisher joins him. Rob asks the climbers to help Scott down. During the descent, the climbers check the oxygen supply. Among all the cylinders, there is not one full. Rob doesn't wait for Doug and goes down with Scott. They meet Doug, who is walking with the last of his strength. Hall tries to turn him around because they won't make it down before dark. Doug, who will have no other chance to climb back up, convinces Rob to climb to the top of Everest. They climb together. Doug collapses from fatigue and struggles to get up to take a photo. At this time, a hurricane approaches them. Doug is short of oxygen. On the way back, several climbers pick up Beck, who has lost his sight. As the storm intensifies, Rob Hall asks for help and oxygen over the radio. His colleague responds to the request and returns to the summit. Parallel to these events, Scott Fisher is left completely exhausted and asks that Anatoly Bukrev be sent for him to bring him oxygen. A hurricane hits the mountain. Strong winds and poor visibility aggravate the situation for all the climbers. Rob Hall screams as hard as he can for Doug to come to his senses. And so, during the descent, the disoriented man disregards safety procedures and unhooks himself from the belay. He falls off the cliff. Later, the climber who came to Rob's aid finds him with an empty oxygen tank. Meanwhile, Scott Fisher freezes to death. The rest of the team tries to save themselves, when suddenly one of the climbers falls off and begins to roll down the slope, knocking his comrades down along the way. Some of them are so exhausted that they can't get to their feet. Some of the staunchest climbers leave for camp, promising to call the others for help. Around midnight they reach the camp. Anatoly Bukrev notices that more than half of the expedition has not returned, and decides to go alone to look for the others. While taking the men away, he didn't notice Beck, who is still alive, and left him under the gusts of wind. Rob and his colleague try to attach the oxygen tank. They fail, as the cold makes it impossible to turn the valve. They huddle together to keep warm. The snow covers them. The climber wakes up and starts tearing off his clothes from hypothermia. He feels he is too hot, and his awkward movements cause him to fall into the abyss. Morning comes. Interference is heard on the radio. Caroline contacts Rob, who is up to his ears in snow. He says he can't feel his arms and legs. He can't move. To encourage him to keep moving, base camp contacts his wife. Helen sends a rescue team to meet him. Rob Hall tries to climb down. The rescuers are unable to continue climbing because a storm has begun. Rob is informed of this. He realizes he is doomed to die and strikes up a last-minute conversation with his wife. They discuss their unborn daughter. Down on the trail, Beck regains consciousness. He manages to make it to the nearest camp with his hands blackened from the cold. Surprised climbers report him to base camp. To evacuate him, they first have to go down to the second base camp and call for a helicopter. The rescuers try to climb up, but the thin air prevents them from doing so. They have never flown above base camp. Then they remove unnecessary parts of the helicopter to reduce its weight. The pilot manages to get the right altitude and land. Beck gets into the helicopter. The pilot warns him that they will fall until the blades catch the air. Beck returns home with his arms and nose amputated. Compared to the rest of the expedition, he still got off easy. The other survivors make their way down to base camp and return home. At the end of the film we are shown real footage of the climbers who took part in the ascent.